Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Things, submitted by Camper von Mozart. Hey, Uncle Jay. Huge fan of your channel, and I heard your call for a creepy summer camp story. I think I've got one here for you. I went to Boy Scout camp from like grade 6 to my junior year when I got my Eagle. It was a blast mostly because our adult leaders really let us do our own thing without a ton of interruption. I'm not saying we were just out bullshitting around, but we were allowed to set up our own camp spots, build furniture out of dead fall trees, and stuff like that. I mean, most of it was for merit badges and stuff anyway. Honestly, it was pretty close to the Scout Handbook. Senior leaders and the adults would check on our site every morning and would be there for our campfires at night sometimes. The camp we went to mostly in the summer was out in the middle of nowhere, and sadly the place has been closed for many years. But it was a great place growing up. We had everything: archery, rifle, a big lake, boats, all the scout stuff that made doing it fun. I looked it up on Google Maps before writing this and made a mental note of what we knew kind of back then. The closest houses were about 2 miles away, and it was surrounded by state land or farms. I mean, that's important for later. There was a creek that ran on the edge of the camp, and it had some really great spots for tent sites. As one of the older guys, you can call me Mike for this story, I asked for and got permission to set up our patrol out there for the week one summer. It was about a half mile from the next nearest building and about 3/4 of a mile from the normal tent area where the other scouts would be staying. The 6 of us, Bobby, Stretch, Tiller, Stork, and Rusty, and I made up the Wolf Patrol. As teenagers in the late 80s, we were really influenced by Red Dawn and movies like that, and had all the gear to match. Red berets, black sneakers or boots, kind of a paramilitary thing. I mean, it sounds silly now, but we took scouting pretty seriously. We all arrived on a Saturday and got squared away with our gear we were going to haul down to the creek on a wagon. The plan was to have our breakfast and lunch with the rest of the troops at the mess hall, but we'd be on our own for dinner before the evening activities, and then our own fire and stuff that we did there, mostly just talking and telling stories. It meant we had to be up earlier than everyone else for the mile hike back to the main camp area, but we didn't care. We all had to be there for the muster, but being on our own in the evenings was the shit. I will say this straight off. Not all of us were namby-pamby scouts. A few of us smoked or dipped, and Tiller had bought a few 3-liters. I mean, damn, remember 3-liter bottles? Those were filled with screwdrivers. Our hard and fast rule with that was you could have some if you could do it without getting hammered or sick. If you couldn't, then you were out. Bobby was the youngest and the newest guy, and he knew his limits, or was just following his own rules of not partaking. The first 2 days of camp were great. We built some camp furniture, like chairs and a table to prep our dinner on, and we'd strung up a clothesline, made a flagpole for our patrol flag, lined the walkway with rocks, things like that. We made sure to keep our site spotless, so when the leaders came down the hill for inspection, everything would be in order, and all the verboten stuff would be hidden away in the woods. On the 3rd night, we'd finished up a group nature hike and made our way back down the hill. Our troop leader, Mr. Johnson, was coming down to spend the evening with us, and he brought along the camp nurse, Ms. Thomas. They both commented on all the work we had put in to make our spot a real scout camp and enjoyed our coffee around a roaring fire. Mr. Johnson talked about his days in the military, and he was a Vietnam vet, and while he told some funny and interesting stories about being overseas, he never went into his combat experience. He never once talked about that. Around 10 o'clock, Mr. J and Ms. T said they were heading back to camp and congratulated us on being the solid scouts that we were. It made us feel good. Once they were out of sight, though, out came the smokes, the 3-liter, and a pack of cards. Into the night we played, laughed, and had a few drinks, and everyone was so stoked to be at camp and relaxing on our secluded spot. I remember Rusty was over to the side, weaving something together to place in the creek inside a deep hole that he dug and lined with rocks. He said it was going to be a sort of live well for fish he was planning on catching for our dinner the next night. He was going to fish in the morning, drop his catch in the well, and then the fresh water running through it would keep the trout alive and fresh without allowing them to escape. At one point, he walked over to his well to see if this weave thing he was putting together would fit, and he came back out of the dark breathing heavily. "Guys, there's someone out here." We almost shit and immediately stashed the booze and smokes and then asked him what he saw. "There's 3 guys a little ways up the creek on the other side." The other side of the creek was a steep cliff with no way to get up it unless you followed the creek down about a mile or so where the ground leveled out. Heading in the other direction, that same wall of cliff was still there. I don't know how long that went on. Anyway, we all looked at him like he was full of it. "I'm not fucking kidding. There's someone there." Tiller said he was going to check it out and made the 20 or so foot walk to the edge of the creek, and we all heard him say out loud, "What the hell?" Then we heard him call out, "Hello? Who is that?" All of us went down there next to him and looked. There was no one there. The rest of us groaned and said, "You guys are full of shit." But Tiller and Rusty said, "No, we're not. We really saw someone over there. There's figures right across the creek." We all stood there for a few minutes, and then, after calling bullshit once again, we went back to the campfire. Both of them insisted that they saw something, but stopped talking about it after a while of us making fun of them. They were a little pissed we didn't believe them, but finally I said we'd go over there in the morning and check it out, but also stay on alert throughout the night in case something funny did happen. The smokes and drinks came back out, and we just sat around for another hour or so letting the fire burn down. We made sure the fire was out, and everyone headed to bed except me and Tiller. Bobby was a little spooked, but we told him everything was fine, not to worry. He was a great kid. He's a great dude now, highly decorated military vet. Tiller and I stayed up having another smoke, and we whispered back and forth. I asked him if he really did see something, and he said, "Yeah, not kidding." At first he said he thought it was camp leaders, but he said they looked kind of funny, like they had capes or something on, and hoods or something. I got quiet and said I'd stay up for a little while making sure things were really okay. Tiller went to bed, and then so did I. Nothing happened during the night. At first light, we all got cleaned up in the creek and waded over to the other side. We looked around for footprints but didn't see anything, and we didn't notice anything out of the ordinary up or down the creek bed. We all made a pact to not say anything to the rest of the folks out there for fear they'd make us tear down camp and spend the rest of it with the others. I mean, that was a fate worse than death as far as we were concerned. Phantoms in the woods was a chance we were willing to take versus a boring rest of the week. The day went on. Rusty did catch a mess of brook trout, and we got some corn and potatoes from the mess hall cook to cook over our fire. When we got back to camp in the afternoon, the live wellhead worked perfectly. I mean, nothing was amiss, nothing was gone from our camp, and we all got dinner ready. After enjoying a delicious meal, we all just sat around the fire. We waited a little while to see if any senior leadership would be coming down the hill, but by 10 o'clock we knew that we were in the clear. Once again, out came the smokes and the screwdrivers. Some of us were getting a little too silly, laughing and fooling around. The figures from the night before came up, and by now it was a joke. Everybody was busting the guy's balls like you would not believe. That's when Stretch got up and said he was going down to the water to see if he could see the phantoms. Stork went along with him, and as we watched them walk away, we were all just rolling with laughter. Then we heard Stretch call out, "Holy shit! Hey, who is that? Who are you?" At first we thought he was kidding around, but Stork yelled back, "Guys, they're back." We all jumped up, scrambling for flashlights and our camp knives. Obviously, it didn't take long to go to the 20 feet down to the creek bed, and as we looked up the creek, faintly, there in the dark, all of us saw 3 figures standing there. Not in the water, right on the edge of it. Through the dark, I could see that they weren't wearing capes or anything like that, but they did have some kind of strange hat on or some kind of headdress. Not like they had horns or like a peaked cap, but the best thing I can describe it was something like what Maleficent has on her head. The only reason I know that is my kid watches that movie endlessly. It just looked out of place and strange. Stork picked up his flashlight and shone it over at them, but by the time he had done so, those things had disappeared. Just poof, gone. They didn't walk towards us. We didn't see them step back. They just sort of vanished. They were gone. We all stood there, breathing heavily and talking about this. It came up that maybe we should pack up and go up with the rest of the campers, but after having the drinks that we had and smelling like cigarettes, we didn't think that that was a good idea. Someone brought up the idea to maybe go and get one of the older folks, one of the leaders, and bring them back down. But again, we also ran the risk of not being able to stay down there anymore, whether there was someone strange out there or not. As we were all talking back and forth, Rusty said, "Guys, right across the creek." We all looked up, and there, maybe 25 or 30 yards across the creek, stood the three figures. This is where it gets weird, and this I can't explain at all, as if I could explain what three strange figures were doing out there in the first place. When we shone our flashlights on them, we could see that they, again, were not wearing capes, just some kind of dark clothing. And the headdress thing looked a little bit different, not like they had horns or antlers. But their faces were not there. They looked like the side of an egg. No eyes, no mouth, no nothing. Obviously, it could have been masks, but holy shit, to see that in the middle of the night in the dark, we were petrified. Everyone continued to stare at them, calling out to them, asking them what they wanted, and "Hey, guys, joke's over. Good laugh, ha-ha, we're all terrified." I backed up, went to my tent without anyone else noticing, and grabbed an old 35mm camera that I had brought to camp. I hadn't used it yet. Actually, I had missed out on a lot of fun, but I figured now was the time to put it into action. As quiet as I could, I came up behind the guys. I asked Bobby, "Where are they?" He pointed across the creek, and at that moment, I took a shot with a flash. It obviously lit up the entire woods. I'm sharing that picture now. When I first thought to share this story, I went through a whole bunch of stuff seeing if I still had it. It doesn't really show much other than Bobby pointing across the creek, and it's a little beat up. I've probably folded it 1,000,000 times. But this is all I have of that week, and anything to show, if you can even call it proof, because it's not. But in that dark, we all knew those figures were standing there. I can't believe that I've saved this picture after all these years. But just like that, after the flash of the camera, they were gone. Again, we all didn't know what to do. We didn't want to jeopardize the rest of the week, but we also didn't know if these things were now behind us. Were they in the woods? Were there more of them? If this was just a bunch of kooks out in the country, what the hell were they up to? Like we said, good joke, ha-ha, it's over. But it wasn't. We all took a vote. Everyone wanted to stay at our camp. We all took a vote about telling someone the next day, and again voted that down. We all went back to the fire ring, kept the fire going for a little bit longer, and most of us kept having some more screwdrivers. Even Bobby had one at this point. I mean, the kid was young, and he was scared, but he was also a trooper. I think the drink calmed him down a little bit. And no, I don't advocate kids drinking. It's just the way things were in the 80s, that's what we did. Stork brought up the fact that if we were going to stay out there, someone had to stay up overnight, just to make sure that nothing crazy happened. Tiller and I volunteered to stay up first, and said that we would wake somebody up around 3. Turns out, we wouldn't need to do that. Eventually, the fire died down again, and we would have kept it going, but no one, and I mean none of us, wanted to go wandering around in the woods looking for other wood to keep on the fire. That was out of the question. Whether or not what we were seeing was human or not, nobody wanted to be in the woods by themselves or in the dark. Tiller and I stayed up, continuing to talk about what the hell this thing was, and most of the guys went back to their tents. I'd like to think that they tried to sleep, but I can't say that they did. We kept kicking it around. What the hell was going on here? If it was someone from camp, they would have pulled the plug on everything that we had been doing right away. They wouldn't have just stood there trying to scare us. They obviously would have known what we were up to, and it was not scout-like. I was starting to drift off. Slowly I did. That's when I heard Tiller talking in his sleep. But he wasn't. He was awake. You know that kind of weird feeling like everything is underwater when you're just about to wake up but you're not truly awake? That's what was going on. And then I realized he was trying to tell me, it's here. It's here. I finally snapped awake, looked up, and dear Mother of God, at the edge of the creek on our side, right next to Rusty's live well, was this thing. It was well over 6 feet tall. Darker than the woods around us, darker than the creek behind it. It just stood there staring at us. I tried to stammer out, "What do you want? Who are you?" Nothing really came out other than a bunch of jumbled nonsense, I'm sure. I went to grab my flashlight, and so did Tiller, but by the time we had raised them up, the thing was gone. Just like that. The seconds that it took for us to grab a light, it vanished. Obviously, our commotion and yelling woke up the rest of the guys, and they came out to the fire ring to see what was going on. We told them that one of these things was right in our midst, and of course that sent another shockwave through the rest of us. Are there more of them? Where's the other two? Are they in our camp? Are they right behind us? Needless to say, no one went back to sleep, and thankfully dawn was not far away. There was another round of should we tell someone, but we all decided to keep our mouths shut. We were going to take our chances, as scared as we were. Yeah, we all thought we were tough guys. We all thought we were hard with our smokes and our drinks and our stupid paramilitary outfits. But truth be told, we were a bunch of scared kids. After we got cleaned up and went back up for breakfast and muster, the day went on as normal, but all of us were completely preoccupied with what had happened at our camp. That night, after an activity of Capture the Flag, we all started that long walk back to our camp, wondering what was going to happen. If they had gotten that close the night before, would this be the night that more would happen? But nothing did. We never saw them again. They never came back. Nothing strange, nothing odd, just a regular, fun week of camp. We only had a couple of days left, and everything went just like Scout Camp always did, and our shenanigans kept up just like they always did. In a way, it was like nothing ever happened. We never told anyone about it, but through the years, after bumping into one another over time and finding each other on social media years later, we've all talked about it, and we're all positive of what we saw. We don't know if they were ghosts, we don't know if they were humans, we don't know what they were. All we know is they were there. I have been in touch with a number of the people who ran the camp, and none of them had ever heard of anything strange happening out in that area. Of course, I didn't tell them the whole story and spill the beans about 3 strange figures wearing funny hats, but I did kind of ask around if anything strange had ever happened in that area. No one had any knowledge of any such thing. Again, it was miles to any other homes, and it was nothing but farmland or state land out there. So yeah, what a terrifying ordeal for a bunch of kids on their own to go through. To this day, we have no idea who it was. Was it an elaborate prank? Well, if so, as I mentioned earlier, good job, whoever that was. But I will never forget that. I wanted to share this story with you, and I hope you guys dug it. If anyone has any idea of what that possibly could have been, I'm all ears, because we have no idea what we saw. Bigfoot at Camp, submitted by Anonymous. This story takes place in Washington, a place that seems to be one of the biggest hotspots in the U.S. for Sasquatch sightings. This was also near a lot of mountains, so that may add a slight bit more credibility. But anyway, my father, in the 70s, or probably around 1973, went to a 6th grade camp at a camp called Camp Timberlake, now called Camp Arnold. He was in middle school, and this camp was new. It could have been the opening year of it. He said some things didn't seem fully built, but he went for a couple of days doing what you would normally do at a 6th grade camp. Then, during one of the nights, he said he heard what sounded like loud walking and rustling in the uncleared forest behind his cabin. Nothing really notable happened, but the counselor for his group told everyone to stay quiet. And then something really weird happened. The entire camp ended the next day, a day early. No one ever explained why, but the next day when they were leaving, his teacher pointed out a huge footprint on the side of a trail. My dad didn't know if others saw it, though, because it was just him, maybe one other student, and the teacher walking back after everyone else. Here's the interesting kicker with this one, gang. Here's an extended account from the same camp at the same time. This one comes from a JG. I'm 48 years old. When I was a child, I used to go to church camp at different camps through the Public Welfare Assistance Program. My family didn't have much money, and my mother would send me to camp every summer. But this summer was different for me because it was the first summer I was going to camp by myself. My sister had gone with me in previous years, and I'm not sure where the camp is located other than it was near Mount Rainier, Washington. The camp was named Camp Timberlake. I believe it's now called Camp Arnold. This was a brand new camp at the time, and it was the opening summer for it. The camp had Boys Town and Girls Town. There was a lake that had a dock with a slide that spiraled, and the dock floated out a few yards from the shore. All the cabins were A-frame cabins with a loft for the counselors. Between the boys' cabins and the girls' cabins was a dining hall. I had a lot of fun that summer, swimming, shooting guns, and bows and arrows. I should mention the cabins were set within the fir trees, and we had about 8 boys per cabin. I think there were maybe 50 or 70 kids total in the camp. I was only about 10 or 12 years old. It was about the 3rd day of camp when everything changed. We had retired for the night and everyone was in bed, and I was awoken by loud noises. Our counselor told us all to stay in our bunks, and I remember the boy who slept in the top bunk above me. I nicknamed him Silvertooth. He had a front tooth that was silver. Silvertooth was looking out the window and said he saw several large, hairy men around the water tower and the cabins. He said they were 10 feet tall. That freaked me out, and I was scared, so I hid under my covers. The counselor was upset and told all of us to stay in our beds and to stay away from the doors and windows. After what seemed to be hours, the ruckus stopped and we all went to sleep. The next morning, when we went outside, just in front of our cabin was a 30 to 40-foot fir tree that had been tipped over, and the root ball was up in the air with a hole in the ground. There were human-like footprints everywhere. There must have been several of them, and of different sizes. I saw hundreds of footprints everywhere, and they ranged from 8 inches to maybe 14 inches in length, and they were depressed into the ground about 1/4 of an inch. I could see the toes. I was pretty young and don't remember everything, but I do remember that. The counselors took us for a walk that day around the perimeter of the camp, and I remember them telling us that the girls had played a joke on us and that we were going to play a joke on them tonight. One counselor said, "You should see the dogs here. They're 5 feet tall." As we walked, we came to the water tower where Silvertooth said he saw these 10-foot men, and there were large footprints all around the water tower. When we got to the lake, something had pulled a bunch of algae or seaweed or whatever out of the water and spread it around everywhere. That night, some of the guys played a prank on the girls, and I wasn't involved with it and don't remember what it was. But the counselor said we really got back at those girls when they came into the cabin. When we all woke up the next morning, suddenly, we were told that we were going home early, and we just were loaded onto the buses to go home 2 or 3 days early. Now, back in those days, I had never heard of Bigfoot. But later in my life, the movie Bigfoot came out, and I went to see it. When the Bigfoot finally came into the camp, it brought me back to that night I had at Camp Timberlake, and the noises I heard. As an adult, I often think about that night and wonder how I could get a hold of someone else who was at Camp Timberlake that summer. I know that all the adults must have seen them and even gotten some photos of whatever was out there. My older sister said that she went to that camp on Mount Rainier, and at the gate it had a sign that said it was the site of the only known sighting of Bigfoot on the mountain. Uncle Josh note: pretty interesting. Story that kind of matches up to something else I found out on that great World Wide Web we have. Premonition by Steve 2001. My experience has very little to do with summer camp other than the fact of that's where this went down. My grandfather on my dad's side wasn't in poor health, generally speaking. This was in 1995, so apart from me being 10, it was also very much pre-cell phone. I was at a summer sleepaway camp. One night, I had a dream where I was drifting down a river in some sort of canoe. At some point, I passed a dilapidated house on the riverbank that was in such disrepair it looked like a cross-section, because you could see all the individual partitioned rooms on the main and second floors. It wasn't a house familiar to me in real life, but in the dream, it didn't seem foreign. Sitting in a rocking chair in front of this house right at the riverbank was my grandfather, except he was full of holes, like cartoonishly. He looked like Swiss cheese. I mean, no gore or anything, but he was just rocking and looking at me and smiling warmly. I tried to move the canoe so I could go over to him, but I couldn't. I was just drifting peacefully, no current. But when I tried to shift the canoe to paddle towards him, it was like when you try to run at a map's edge in a video game, and there's an invisible barrier you can't penetrate. My grandfather just waved to me, and I kept on floating by, desperately trying to get to him, but I just couldn't. And then I woke up. Later that next day, camp administration pulled me aside and told me that my parents were on the way to pick me up from camp. The night before, my grandfather had died of a massive heart attack, and my parents were coming to get me to go to Montreal for the funeral and stuff. I never had any sort of premonition dream experience before or since, but that really stuck with me. Even now, as a 35-year-old who doesn't believe in the supernatural or the divine, I can't explain that dream or its proximity to my grandpa's sudden and unexpected death. The Woods Have Eyes by Damien St. James. When I was about 10 years old, I went to a summer camp in Oregon named Camp Howard. It was a CYO camp. This was summer of 1994, and the Catholic youth camp really felt more like every traditional summer camp you might see in the movies. Sneaking out in the middle of the night to go skinny dipping and over-the-top campfire horror stories, all manner of activities. To be honest, it was a blast. This story concerned a said late-night skinny dipping. 4 of us guys really hit it off, and nothing erotic, just as a disclaimer. We all just had similar thoughts and comfort about being nude around one another. Our cabin was near this old pool dating back to World War II. It was concrete, old, and mostly still in moving water. They had a proper lake, but none of us felt comfortable walking that far in the dark. And they also had a brand new swimming pool, but that was fenced off and had a security buoy that would screech if anything disturbed it too much. This was about 2 weeks into my stay, and Howard offered longer blocks back then, when my new camp besties decided some midnight skinny dipping was in order. For the purposes of the story, I'm going to name them Sean, John, and Eric. Sean was like me in both looks and attitude. We both pretty much loved the exact same things, and John and Eric were quite friendly and open-minded, but our interests were a bit off outside of swimming without clothing. John loved country music, horseback riding, and model building. I didn't. And Eric was into hardcore gangster rap, basketball, and DC Comics, something I'm also not into. Sean could have been my brother. Both of us were raised in very nurturing and progressive families. We both loved the same music, video games, comics, books, the works. And both of us had discovered we were gay at an early age. So there was also that going for us. The four of us snuck out like ninjas one night. I was skinny as a rail back then and quite adept at sneaking. And my eyes have always been exceptional in anything other than total darkness. So I didn't really need a flashlight, though we took one just to be safe. Our plan was to go, strip, swim, and then get out and walk the trails just a little in the buff to air dry, and then return to our beds unnoticed. We made it to the pool undetected. We chucked our clothes and began to swim. Sean and I sat next to one another, and we were talking about boys we liked back home. And Eric and John were in the middle of a who can hold their breath the longest contest. Sean was telling me about this boy in class he was sweet on, but was too afraid to ask him out or anything. He said, "We're still 10, let's worry about dating in high school." And he agreed, worried that there might be some law or something he'd be breaking anyway. It was very shortly afterward that Sean put his hand on my chest hard. I want to restate, this was not a romantic advance. It was that, oh my God, kind of slap to the chest. Much like a parent would do to prevent someone from walking into danger. I asked him, "What?" Sean shivered and said, "Oh my God, someone's out there." And I should note, the water was cold but not freezing. Then it was still around 80 degrees outside, so I figured if I wasn't shivering, then everyone else should be fine, right? "Where?" I asked. Sean pointed and even grabbed my chin to point me in the right direction. And he was right. Even in the dark, and around a 6-foot to 6.5-foot height, were a pair of eyes in the shadowy shape of a man. The eyes behave much like a cat's when they reflect light, that animal yellow-greenish in the dark. Yet this thing was the height of a man. Sean and I whispered to John and Eric to get over closer to us, and they did. We showed them the shadow. John damn near screamed, but just did that sudden squeak and then slapped his hand over his mouth. Eric uttered an obscenity and wondered if it was a counselor on night patrol. We asked, well, why wouldn't they have said anything to us then? Shine a flashlight at us, yelled, "Hey, you kids," or something like that. Eric insinuated something fairly dark that I won't repeat, but the irony of telling Eric that his argument didn't hold water isn't lost on me. Sean asked aloud what we should do, and I said, grab our clothes and run. I said I'd take the lead since my night vision was the best. We'd run close to our cabins, throw our clothes back on, get back into the cabin, and then climb into bed. They agreed on the plan. I counted to 3, and we all ran. We grabbed our clothes, and I hadn't thought to put our sandals back on, so let me tell you, running on that trail hurt for days after. But we just ran, every once in a while looking over our shoulders. The figures seemed to be following us, but still getting further and further away. We made it to our rally point, got dressed, and then climbed into our cabin. We slipped back into our beds silently, and no one was the wiser. And every now and again afterwards, while walking to campfire, we'd swear we'd catch glimpses of that figure. All summer long it was this eerie presence. One night my counselor sat the 4 of us down, and he had noticed a drastic change in our moods and behaviors. We said we'd tell, but we didn't want to get into trouble. And he said he wouldn't tell anyone, on the contingent that we fessed up. We told him the whole thing. We admitted to sneaking out, the skinny dipping, and the shadow figure. At first, he laughed, and he told us that he started going to Howard back in the 70s, and sneaking out to skinny dip was practically tradition among young boys, and we shouldn't do it again, but he said it was really a no-harm, no-foul instance. But then his expression darkened, and he confessed that as far back as 1978, the last year he attended as a youth, he also saw the same figure. He told us that he told his counselor roughly the exact same story. He and a much larger group of boys had snuck out for a skinny dip when they also saw this figure. My counselor said that his counselor told roughly the exact same story from when he was a camper there. So in the end, we learned that as far back as the 60s, this phantom has appeared near the upper pool, very late at night. Okay, gang, to round things out, here's a whole bunch of stories. Some of them are pretty short, but I hope you dig them all. I Thought He Was Security by Retrosonic82. This was early 90s at a school camp. I got up during the night to go to the camp toilet. It wasn't far away, and I could see it from our tent. There wasn't anybody around, and on my way back, I spotted a man I didn't recognize shining a torch into the side of the boys' tent to make shadows appear. When he saw me approach, he put his torch away and walked away, but was sort of hovering around the campsite. Now, I thought he was campsite security and that I was going to get in trouble for leaving my tent during the night, and as I was an anxious kid, it kept me up all night. As I couldn't sleep, I noticed for a good hour or so that the guy was still walking around and shining his torch into the side of tents. I could hear him and see the light. In the morning, I was falling asleep at breakfast and my friends were talking the piss about it. One of the teachers noticed and thought I was getting sick, so she came over to ask if I was all right, and I said I had been up all night because of the camp security guard shining his torch into the tents. She looked horrified and said, "What camp security?" and went off to tell one of the male teachers. It turned out that the campsite didn't have any security, and the police were called out. Some guy who was known to that area for being a sex offender had recently been released from prison and was living in the nearby forest in a tent. They Took Us Into the Woods by Atlantis Airlines. I was about 12 and I was at sleepaway camp, and the counselors took us on a hike into the woods for a night. When it came time to go to bed, of course none of us were actually falling asleep, and we overheard the counselors talking about the police looking for someone. We later learned that one of the kids was in the middle of a serious custody battle, and that the dad was planning on coming out there and taking the kid, and that the reason we were in the woods was so that he wouldn't find us at the cabin. They were a little unsure of what he was exactly going to do. Who knows? No idea if it was actually dangerous, but looking back, it definitely was unsettling. Archery by Street Mitch. Went to a Boy Scout summer camp in the mid to late 90s. They had an archery range where we were all learning how to shoot. They were big on safety, but it was the 90s, so... Anyway, everyone shot, and we were all downrange getting our arrows, when we heard someone yell out in the covered shooting area. I looked up and saw that this semi-special needs kid was holding an arrow at full draw and let it go. He hit the kid standing 5 feet from me in the arm, and it was chaos as everyone was running around and screaming. The kid with the arrow stuck out of him was just standing there in shock. The year after that, there was no more archery training. The Deep Wilderness by Blah Blah Tra-la-la-la-la. We were on this really long canoe trip in northern Ontario, like deep wilderness. We were on this gorgeous clear lake when we found a secluded beach, and it was really beautiful, so we decided to stay there for the night. The whole day and even sitting around the fire that night felt weird, but I really couldn't place my finger on it. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of soft country music. None of us had a stereo, so I stuck my head out of the tent to see what the fuck was up. There was a bald guy going through our campsite, picking up stuff as he went along. We made eye contact, and he put a finger to his lips and made a shh sound. So I went back to hiding in my sleeping bag. I can't remember exactly what he took, but it wasn't much. Turns out, there's a pretty significant hermit population in northern Ontario. Ghostly Suicide by Gozer de Gozerian. I was in a summer camp on an island when I was 13, and we were hanging out at the beach during dawn. All of a sudden, a woman came out of nowhere and walked with big steps towards the water. She'd been wearing this big white cape thing, which she threw down dramatically, and underneath, she was completely naked. When she reached the water, she walked into it, despite it not being very warm, until she started to swim. She swam straight ahead, away from the island, until we lost track of her. We stayed there for about another hour and a half, but she never came back. And it was dark, and she was naked, and her cape was still at the beach. Back then we joked that she was a mermaid, but it later occurred to me that we might have just have witnessed a suicide. Creepers by J.S. When I was 14, turning 15, I went to a confirmation camp. This place was located in the middle of literally nothing, just endless forest all around us. There were a total of maybe 30 of us, teenagers as me and the camp leaders. The cottage was 2 floors high, and on the second floor was the girls' bedrooms. We were settled down to sleep, and it was probably around midnight when suddenly there was a really loud banging on the only window the room had. Since it was already dark outside at that time, we really couldn't see what, or rather who it was, until the person turned a flashlight on. The light was going through the room, and we were able to see 2 grown-up men, probably around 30 years old, lurking on us and smiling. Thanks to whoever built that place, the window couldn't be opened and wouldn't fit a person through it anyway. The leaders, of course, heard the screams and voices and called the police, but the men had had enough time to escape before the authorities made it there. In the morning, while discussing the events of the past night, it turned out that one of the girls in the camp was actually having some kind of relationship with one of those guys. Yeah, illegal much? She had invited them out. The police did go out and have a chat with those guys, but they never got anything out of it since they didn't do anything illegal enough. It was still very creepy to wake up to grown-up random men looking at young girls while they were sleeping, on the second floor. That's the day we found out there was a fire escape under the window. Disturbing Guy by Nashville Sun. I went to a popular Christian faith-based sports camp for several summers as a kid. When I was 12, one of my cabin counselors turned out to be the most popular and beloved leader at camp. He was inclusive, energetic, and fun. He gave just as much attention to the cool and popular kids as he did to the outcasts. Randomly, he went to the same university as my older brother and my best friend's older sisters, so that created a connection with our families. He also happened to be romantically involved at the time with an up-and-coming singer who lived in our hometown. For a couple of years after we first got to know him at camp, he would visit my family and my friend's family for long weekends. By that time, I was over camp. I never enjoyed playing sports, and that was the only thing the camp had to offer. But this guy would give me and my friend a hard time about bailing on camp and not writing him with any reliable frequency. By the time I finished junior high, the relationship I had with him had fallen by the wayside. Anyway, about 10 years ago, this guy was arrested and convicted for being a serial child abuser. His M.O.? make the victims feel special and get close to their family. Last I checked, almost 60 victims had come forward. One of them sadly committed suicide in 2019. The camp leadership knew pretty much the entire time what was going on and did everything they could to keep the authorities out of it. Apparently, he tried to with me, but I was lucky enough to never be one of his victims. The guy is currently serving 2 life sentences plus 30 years in prison. Caves in the Lake by Taylor 12. Every year I went to the same camp, and every year they told us 3 things. Watch out for banana spiders, don't have sex, and don't attempt to dive down the lake. The lake in question had many caves at the bottom of it, probably 50 feet or 100 feet down. They used to teach scuba diving, but stopped after a counselor drowned. Nobody had scuba dived in that lake or attempted to reach the bottom for like 15 years when this happened. The stories had been passed on from counselor to counselor, and all of it was relatively the same. A group of kids didn't see their counselor, searched for him, and came back up when their oxygen got low, and then finally told another counselor. The counselors went in the water to look for him, and people checked every inch of the camp in the middle of the woods. People were praying he wasn't in the water, and somehow got out. But 3 hours later, his body was found and taken from the water. He was 22 years old, and gone just like that. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard and you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, including other summer camp stories, that would be awesome if you kept the stoke going, send them my way. Uncle Josh, truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching us on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, give the video a thumbs up. Hit the notification bell for every time I upload, tell a friend about it, and if you're not a subscriber, now's the time to become one. I'd appreciate all of that. If you'd like to take your support of my channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and check out my storefront at tpublic.com. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. For this summer, it's the hottest thing since sunburn. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.